Hello, LinkedIn Live. Today we are here with Financial Clarity Live. And today we're going to be talking about becoming a pro when managing your flow. Obviously, we're on the topic of finance and cash flow. I want to welcome you today to Financial Clarity Live, where we're here to transform the way you and your business think about your business finances. Okay, so this is not just a numbers game, it's about clarity, it's about strategy and taking control. So over the next 30 minutes, you can expect that we're going to help you demystify the financial process around planning and strategy. We're going to show you why FP&A matters. And today we're going to talk about cash flow and how to unlock your business's true potential. So together we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to focus on what matters most and arm you with the tools that make you smarter, sharper, and hopefully able to make better decisions. But I want to start by thanking my guest, Augie Manzella, the financial analyst at Sustain CFO, who's been guiding a lot of our process, and then my business partner, Phil Maffey, who is the CFO at Sustain CFO. Thank you guys for joining us, and let's dive right in. So, Phil, I'd like to start with you. You're kind of the king of our financial castle. When you think about cash flow and why they say it's king, I guess there can only be one king. So why is cash flow king?
I think that's a great question. What we're here to talk about today, and your cash is the lifeblood of what you're doing. So if you don't have much of it, you're not going to be in business for very long. And the better you are at managing it, it allows you to take advantage of opportunities, avoid potential pitfalls, and if you're not managing your cash flow properly, you're going to eventually run into some sort of issue.
Yes. Okay. And Augie, in prior weeks, we've been talking about financial statements, cash versus profit and the management of this. But today we're really talking about the importance of cash and cash management, as well as jumping into some pitfalls and what best practices are. I guess, just keeping this really practical for the business owner out there. They're making, let's say, 2 to 20 million in revenue. It's a lot of dollars if you're thinking about it individually, but as a business, it might still be coming down to, week to week, payroll to payroll. I guess, what is, the one key that you see when it comes to cash flow management?
Basically, one of my main roles at Sustain, I incorporate historical data with real-time inputs into a dynamic model that allows us to be prepared for any scenario that might come up.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So it's about being ready for the unknown that is coming, because that you will not be able to forecast perfectly, but having some reserves and a plan in place and a place where, as things change, you can go and update, gives you the new latest amount of information to make decisions off of. So, all right, let's go to the essence of this. So, at a definition level, we're talking about cash flow being the movement of money in and out of your business. It's critical for daily operations and obviously to be making strategic decisions. But Phil, when you think about managing cash and forecasting cash, I guess, how do you view that as what different from this definition of the money moving in and moving out?
When it comes to managing cash flow, at least for me, is everything kind of works backwards from there. Figuring out first and foremost what it takes to operate into what we call kind of break-even analysis, and try to figure out how much do I need to make to sustain myself without having to get some kind of external financing. So it's really the cornerstone and kind of where we start and work backwards from a lot of ways in order to build projections and try to build things that are bulletproof from a best case, worst case scenario.
Okay. And Augie, I know that your work a lot of times is about ensuring accuracy and adaptability to the model, but I guess in the work that you do and even some of the businesses you've owned yourself, how have you seen the challenges arise as far as you didn't have enough cash, or maybe you had too much sitting there and not working for you? And what, if anything, do you say to the audience around how to frame that out? And it seems like you're kind of always on one side or the other of that equation. And, how do you stay nimble to be ready to be on kind of offense or defense when it comes to cash flow management?
Well, I would always recommend that in the early stages you stay as lean as possible to give you as much of a buffer. But once you're rolling along well, usually things get caught up in terms of, you know, accounts receivable. You might have a contract that there's a miscommunication and the timing of when that income is going to be coming in, it gets misproperly placed somewhere. And if you don't catch that, you can definitely, it adds up downstream. So by having our models where we're constantly double checking, and a lot of the technology helps with that, and we'll send an alert and we can kind of, before it gets to be too much of a mess, we can go in there and make sure that everything's operating smoothly.
Okay, perfect. So, doing this tightrope walk over a city with your path paved with gold. I know AI is presenting us with some fun images of things we've actually experienced or had our clients experience. I guess, Phil, what's a real world example of how overestimating your revenue can kind of hurt the company's actual cash flow?
Yeah, so when we see this a lot with the funded startups that we work with, to Augie's earlier point, staying lean in the early days is really important. And a lot of these folks have big ambitions, and they got a bunch of cash to go do the thing, and they're excited about it, and they want to build the team, and they get out ahead of their skis in the sense of spending money before it comes in and overestimating how much it's going to come in from a top line perspective. So when that doesn't start to materialize, and you put a bunch of fixed costs into the business, especially people on the team, the runway is a term we talk about a lot. And as that starts to runway gets shorter and you're getting closer to the end, if you're not managing revenue expectations and your cost base, then you're going to be making some tough decisions in terms of hiring people and firing people, and just creates bad company culture, and you kind of get into a bad place if you're not realistic with your expectations from a top line perspective and how long it's going to really take to gain traction and start meeting those revenue targets you've come up with on the back of an napkin for business that hasn't generated any revenue yet. So it's definitely a guessing game, and if you're not being conservative, you can get into a lot of trouble. We see that a lot with our clients.
Absolutely. And Phil, we're not, we might be experts in cash flow management and being CFOs, but as far as perfectly predicting our revenue, like everyone else, it's a sales funnel. It's hard to predict. I was talking to a guy actually earlier today who mentioned, he's in the food business and he's got perishable goods, obviously, and he had a big deal on the line with a major retailer, and he said that he had been told by their buyers, like, hey, big purchase, go ahead and ramp up, get ready, we're going to need that order in 90 days. And the first time he did this, it just sat there for 90 days, perishable foods gone, right, wiped out cash. In addition, he was hiring and ramping into that. And I think we want to deliver when we say we will. And this is the delicate balance, because being in position to deliver versus creating a wait list or a line, it depends on what industry you're in. Those are kind of both sides of the supply and demand curve, and you've got to pick your poison. I think there are good examples out there of folks who have kind of managed this well, where they keep the maybe the demand at bay, and they don't risk their supply chain or their runway from diminishing. So, Augie, how do you see timing mismatches between inflows and outflows impact cash, and what can be done to maybe address those? Maybe for more of a steady business, maybe a family business, somebody out there that's owned it for 20 years and kind of knows the seasonality.
From what I've seen, the biggest mismatches, they result in sort of scrambling for cash at the last minute to be able to pay utilities, pay rent, pay employees, keep your stock up, whatever it might be. And by making sure that you have not only your historical data, but also your rolling forecast, you can be much more on top of where your money is when, and knowing you have enough in the pipeline to make sure that you can operate.
That's a good way to think about it, right? It's like, if we've given the example of the business being a vehicle and it has a tank of gas, and you've got the meter on it that tells you as it's ticking down towards empty, and it tells you, nowadays with digital readouts, it tells you basically how many miles you can go. but do you know where your next gas station is? Is it going to be an optimal one? Because if you roll in on fumes, you're paying whatever they say, and it may not be optimal. And it could put you in a much more dangerous position to get to the next station. So I think, to your point, having those reserves, being a bit conservative, which is not fiscal conservative, doesn't necessarily go with visionary entrepreneur. So I think you got to weigh those things, and sometimes almost view this as wearing a different hat when you're making those decisions on the financial side of reserves versus the ones about how to get the product to market and such. So let's talk about some of those tools. So Augie, you mentioned the rolling forecast. Can you just, if I just beamed here from Mars and I didn't know anything about finance, what's a rolling forecast? How does it work?
Basically, it's just like a budget in the future, an idea of, you can look at it at either a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, and it gives you an idea of an upper limit, lower limit in terms of how close are you to hitting your goals. And if you are, that'll put you in this position. And if you're this shy, that'll put you in this position. That helps you plan with things like, you know, equipment acquisition or hiring, making sure you have enough to allocate for that in a timely fashion.
Awesome. And, Phil, you have been a big part of implementing software. A lot of the folks out there, probably 9 out of 10, are using QuickBooks or a similar system for their ledger of record. Talk about how we use software that's specifically for building out these custom rolling forecasts. How do we do that? And kind of what level of effort does it take to get a client on board to start to really be mastering their cash flow?
You mentioned it all starts with your ledger, which most of our clients is QuickBooks. So, that involves timely and accurate, reconciliations and transaction discipline, right? If your books are up to date, they're going to give you the latest and greatest information that's available, and they can generate really useful reports like receivables aging, payables aging. You can see what bills you got out there to pay, what you got out there to go collect, and that's a really good way to manage your short-term cash flow. And to your other question about, right, the other side of this coin is managing what's coming down the pipeline on the rolling forecast. And so we use a variety of different tools, right? So for our less complex clients, you can do it in a spreadsheet. And for our bigger clients, right, we've got software that we give various folks access to. They're providing us with inputs from a accountability perspective, and then we're building a forecast from the bottoms up, using various drivers of the business, and then making sure that the various owners of the P&L are accountable for their budgets and their expectations, so that way everyone's on the same page. And if the people who are spending the money don't know how much it is that they have to go out there and spend, you can put all the budgets you want together and all the forecasts together, but you're not gonna have any level of accuracy because there's not a lot of cooperation and teamwork across the organization.
Yeah. Okay. So Phil, thank you. I'm gonna touch on that with a follow up. So, like you said, this is done in a silo. If it's one person's dream, and then it just gets kind of like confetti papered down on everyone else, like, yay, okay, we got the rolling forecast. That's not really going to work. So how do you align financial operations with the actual cash flow goals during these, let's say periods of growth or, periods of uncertainty in a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's day in and day out and month out, right? It's a function of having the folks who are, take your marketing department, for example. They're a piece of the puzzle. They have a budget. They have, a team that they're responsible for that costs money. And, the people who own that function are, need to be in the know of, right, what's happening with those line items, right? How much money are they spending? What's the efficacy of those dollars in terms of, for the case of marketing, you're turning around and generating leads, and the conversations become dynamic. It's not just, to your point, the owner of the business in the room, but everyone who has those responsibilities and is being held accountable. They get visibility into how what they're responsible for is a small piece of the total picture. So we function. It's just really using the tools to keep that line of communication open and producing reporting that shows everybody where we stand against a variety of different metrics.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen kind of two different versions of the challenge, right? There's somebody that maybe wants to operate a bit in a back office room and then, just send that message out without much context around it. And then there's other folks who don't want to share. right? It's natural. We've been taught, a lot of us, growing up, don't talk about money. It's inappropriate. It's taboo. If you have too much, you're bragging. If you don't have enough, you're being needy, whatever, right? Like, we all have our own story, psychological, conditions around money. It's a pretty basic need, and it comes up. But once you get into business, it's also like the narrative of the story. And so I think what we really focus on is getting the team around telling that story on a consistent basis, in a consistent way, with all of those key decision makers at the same place, the same time, on at least a quarterly basis. Obviously, we're going to recommend monthly, and it may take even biweekly or weekly in order to bring the organization around that, depending on how big and complex the decision-making process is. But with this being said, once you're in that room, you got everybody around the table. Ultimately, now we got to make sure accountability is in place for making the decisions, right? If it's a critical decision and it needs to be made, it's probably that decision is going to flow up to the top. So this is where maybe preparation comes in place to make sure you're not showing up at a meeting just to look at reports. You really should be prepping for that meeting. So Phil, can you kind of talk about how maybe we help some of more sophisticated clients prepare for board meetings, and how we support them after the board meetings from a standpoint of making timely decisions and providing scenario analysis?
Yeah. So from a reporting perspective, I kind of have to echo this a little bit. Previous versions of this, where it's, whether it's a board meeting or whatever it may be, there's a target audience that needs some level of information. A lot of our clients don't know what that needs to look like out of the gates, right? So it's all about who the audience is, and then we manage the scenarios accordingly. So you think about it, right? If you've got an investor you're courting, you may be a little bit more of an aggressive scenario versus a banker, and you're a little bit more conservative because you're looking for whatever it may be from that particular audience. So what we'll do is, whatever that audience may be in the case of a board meeting, understanding what the outcome is, what information it is we want to deliver to them, and then kind of going back to what we've just been talking about, right? Is there's the CEO that are delivering the main message, and then they're going to have the key members of their team responsible for what's going on with sales, what's going on with the various departments within the business, right? So it's just the tip of the iceberg, in the sense, if you're doing this process correctly, everyone knows again where their piece stands and the plan for the future for those individual components, and then it's just our job to pull it all together and paint the picture in the aggregate.
I got a like Monty Python feel on this one. So we just talked about how do you do this. You align operations, you empower the team, you stay agile as the information flows, because it's definitely not going to be exactly what you forecast. It's always going to be somewhat off. Doesn't mean that you don't attempt to make accuracy an objective, but if perfection is your objective, you're going to fail for sure. So we got a couple of kind of audience related questions that have been coming in. I want to just ID one, throw it out to the group. So Sarah from Bright Sky Digital Marketing says, our digital marketing agency has seasonal cash flow fluctuations, especially during the summer when clients pause campaigns because they don't have their sales and marketing team in place to support them. How can we better manage cash flow during these slow periods? Okay, thank you, Sarah, for that. I'm going to kick it over to Phil first, if you can give us a way to think about cash flow management with seasonality.
Well, I think she's one step ahead of the game, because she recognizes that that's the case with the business. And so it's, when it comes to managing cash, you got to be prepared for those lean times, right? So whatever you can, that's from a variable perspective, right? Those are probably the months of the year where you're not doing big team events or spending a ton on marketing, when it's not going to be the best use of that cash. So the first step is identifying, right, what those periods look like, and then kind of like a squirrel ahead of winter, right? You make sure you build up the cash reserves coming up to the front of the times we're going to be a little leaner, so that way you can be prepared on the back end of that without having to cut too deep or destroy the operations of the business to survive the lean time. So you're obviously, if you're in business for the times that are on the inverse of that, right? So you're kind of hitting the ground running whenever folks are getting back up and at it, and you're not, burning all of your cash to just stay around, but ultimately, thriving coming out of what you expect to be a leaner period.
That's Well said. And Augie, I want to get your entrepreneurial take on this. I know you have a background in agriculture, farming. I think farmers tend to be some of the most innovative when it comes to dealing with seasonality because it is literally baked into the business model. Um, I've seen a lot of farms around me that do interesting things to generate revenue in their off season, right? So instead of just, okay, we harvest all the food, let's have a corn maze, or a pumpkin patch for the kids and, uh, pet the animals. I guess when you think about business owners that maybe own multiple businesses and one of them is really seasonal, have you seen an example where they're able to kind of use those resources towards another business that they own or acquire one to basically just backflow the work? Can you think of anything?
Sure, there's always opportunities for vertical integration like that, where you have to have a place for your primary business to operate out of, and usually there's at least a spare corner, or who knows, depending on the application. A lot of times in agriculture, you're dealing with quite a lot of land, so that's that's kind of already accounted for. And that gives you a lot of opportunities to, like you were saying, stack functions and possibly even lower your own bottom line in terms of expenses, because now maybe you are getting an input for your primary business, and instead of getting whatever level of bulk you were receiving before, you decide to go in on a much larger quantity, and now you're also have a secondary cash stream from maybe retailing or wholesaling your inputs.
Sure. Okay. All right. So we're going to kind of point at a couple of real world situations. So let's talk about. I think you guys will recognize kind of the story. We won't put names out there, but we had a turnaround business that was in the health tech space that implemented precise forecasting to really turn things around and use their open, you know, availability, basically additional supply into a marketing tool. Um, so now that same business is starting to hit a growth phase, and they're starting to, basically run out of rooms in their health tech business, and so now they're looking at acquiring other businesses, and so cash flow management, of the core business is absolutely necessary. But now we're using that to forecast the next iteration of this. So I guess, Phil, as you guide that client forward, how do you help them think about this one world that's very real because they have the business, and then what they're forecasting and trying to acquire based on the value, and almost looking at it with a flip scenario? How do you view that? How do you frame that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's, don't ever want to lose sight of, what you've got in front of you with the bright shiny object out into the future of where you're trying to go, right? So the first part is to maintain the level of the discipline that got you to where you are. And then, from our perspective, right, when it comes to, doing these kinds of deals, you always want to make sure that you get your terms, right? And it's it's a little bit ruthless to say, but you don't ever want to necessarily, purchase something from somebody who doesn't really have to sell it to, or they're kind of going to be, going to be not giving you maybe some favorable terms. And I think it's really always comes down to, right, being patient enough to find the right deal, and then, understanding your core business well enough to realize how this new business is going to wrap around that. And, that just kind of goes into the diligence process. We've been through this a lot of times. So it's always important to go through things with a fine tooth comb, making sure you really understand all the ins and outs and what you're getting yourself into before you sign any LOIs, or, kind of commit to any prices and deals, because, it's I think I think this particular client that says, the deal gets done in the beginning of it and on the back end of it, right? If you don't make a good deal out of the gates, you're kind of starting behind the eight ball. So, and I think just maintaining cash and maintaining the strength of that core business allows you to stay patient to find that right next opportunity. So
I like that trader mindset of, like, you set the position of which you will take the trade, and then you wait patiently. And if you move outside of that, number one, you're going to deal with the consequences, and number two, like, kind of shame on you, because if you have the information, if you've done this once before, you should have some information to set a disciplined entry point. buy signal. Okay, we got another audience member. This is from an industry we've worked a lot with. Mike from Apex Roofing Solutions says, our business often faces delays in payments from clients, which impacts our ability to pay vendors on time. What's the best way to manage this issue without straining relationships? Let's start with Augie in the analyst view.
Well, luckily, there's a lot of new technology available that helps with invoicing and sending out reminders, notifications, and that tends to help a lot in terms of getting paid. So before you have to call up and use a stern voice, a little email reminder or a text message, especially from an automated system, you'd be surprised. The conversion rate is quite high.
No doubt. And Phil, how about your view on this kind of same question, especially in the construction industry?
Yeah, I think it's always, one of the things we see a lot of is you don't ever want your sales guys who are responsible for going to get the new business also necessarily being the ones going out doing the collecting. So it's good to have a dedicated resource around this as opposed to wearing too many hats on the sales side of the house. To Augie's point, there's a lot of good tech that could help, with one person making a few phone calls to the people who are super delinquent or bigger dollar amounts, and you can manage a high volume of this. And then some other things we've seen, right, especially in this industry is, providing, favorable payment terms for expedited payments, right, discounts, things like that to kind of dangle a little bit of a carrot to, generate that cash flow a little bit more quickly and increase the velocity of, getting paid. It's all about negotiating those terms and getting them as favorable as you can, as quick as you can on the way in, and as favorable and as slow as you can on the way out. And to the extent you do
Right.
that, you're in a good shape.
Right. That does not make it too complex, right? All right. So this is kind of looking at it not from exactly our role, but one that needs to be played in order for us to do our best. We just talked about, a lot of this, right? But the controller, if that function is not defined with a person and title, it is being played or it's not being played by someone on the team. But, I think in order for cash flow to even be managed, you need to have your accounting system tight, because otherwise you're looking at inaccurate information and probably in the rearview mirror. So, I guess, Phil, when you think about the work that we do with controllers and that are doing their job and doing it right and doing the best, what are some of those things that we found kind of looking at our last episode where the finance team was working in sync and working together that tend to, ultimately make the difference as to whether the information is timely and presentable and informative? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that this, from a receivables and payables perspective, right, that really sits in the controller's organization, right? So, at the end of the day, they're the ones who, that's kind of the seat that owns the processes and procedures around this and putting the right resources in place to manage this properly, right? So, what I think we've seen that works well is, first of all, the use of tools that allow us to get visibility into this stuff, right? So things like bill.com, nothing too crazy, but, it allows for, a lot of visibility before, payments get made and things like that. So that'll just kind of gets everyone around the implications from a cash flow perspective. So I think the controller organization is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then you've got, to your point, right? This information is accurate, it's timely, and you can make real-time decisions with information as opposed to waiting around for someone to reconcile an account or get around to processing an inbox full of bills or something like that.
Sure. All right. So just bringing us in for the lightning round finish. So maintaining cash flow discipline, right? Starts with that quarterly strategy. If we're kind of going ground up, the monthly forecast, and we've talked in almost every one of our episodes about why it's so important. Doing weekly reviews, this includes kind of that controller function, and then even at a tighter level of the AP and the AR being done at a daily level. This is kind of how it stacks up and what that discipline looks like. None of these words are incredibly tough to grasp, but getting the whole process in sync is a best practice and the best way to move forward and keep cash as king in your castle. So key takeaways, right? We've already talked about cash and its importance, using the right tools, staying vigilant and creative when it comes to working with your supply chain, and then ultimately making those timely decisions as they arise. Now that you have the information, that might be hard if you've constantly been behind the 8 ball and operating off of gut instinct. So I just want to say thank you for everybody out there that's participating on LinkedIn. I guess Phil Maffey and Augie Manziel, thanks for joining us. We've got a newsletter launching, so be on the lookout for that. And then next week, same time, 3 p.m. on Wednesday, we're going to be jumping into the other side of this around budgeting and how that process can end up, either holding a system hostage with kind of a stale level of being stuck on the shelf, or can unlock that rolling forecast process. And we'll see how these pieces fit together. So with that being said, we're going to keep the Q&A going on LinkedIn. Want to thank our live audience, and I want to thank my guest. And that was another week of Financial Clarity Live. Thank you.
Thanks again, Josh.
Thanks, everybody.